Welcome everyone to the fifth session of Mishnah in Depth, Bava Basra, with Rabbi Nathaniel Helfgot. I hope you've been enjoying these past several weeks as part of our This class is part of our Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah Division at Drisha and is sponsored in her memory by her family. Thank you to everyone who's been following along with us for the Mishnah Yomit cycle of classes. There are two sources for tonight, both of which were sent out, and I will share in chat once Rabbi Helfgot gets things underway. And with that, I want to hand things over to you, Rev Nati.
Okay. Thank you. If you can, as you said, if you could share the sheet. Good evening to everybody. I hope everybody's well and had a good week. Again, the learning is in memory of Rifka Rosenwein. It was a very, very special woman. And also, of course, we think about the Chatufim and all those who are still in captivity and those in harm's way. And we pray for them. Okay, tonight we're going to look at chapter 7 and and at least a lot of chapter 8. How much we'll see in a second. Chapter 7 is really the tail end of what we were doing last week. Last week we did the chativa. We were doing the unit that focused on mechira, on the laws related to buying and selling, and what's included, what's not included. When I sell a donkey, when I sell this, what's included, what's not included. And that was the, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6. And we are now in chapter 7. So is it in the chat? Yeah, okay. So let's start the first one. I think that's the first one. Yeah, so we can look at that. Okay, so let me make that, let me share that because you also have it, but we'll zoom, we'll share. Okay, so as I said, so the first one, okay, so chapter 7 is a continuation. It's a short chapter, and the first Mishnah talks about the following situation. I'm selling you a certain amount of field, this amount of field. So what happens if it has little ditches inside, which are at least asarat tfachim? If a tefach is a foot and a half, so it's like 15 feet, or it has very big rocks, which are at least 10 tfachim. So that doesn't count as part of what you sold, meaning people expect arable land that they can take care of, land that they can use for produce. But if it's less than that, it is, again, and this is all connected to the principle, probably, that this was the standard approach. Now, you could say there's two ways to understand the issue in this Mishnah. Issue number one is that it could be that the issue is that halachically, if you have this amount, the rocks are this high, or the ditches are this high, they constitute technically a reshut acheret, just like in Hilchot Eruvin. In the laws of Eruvin, they may constitute a different domain. And so they're totally not part of what I asked for. On the other hand, it could be that it has nothing to do with Hilchot's domain. It just simply has to do with that it's very difficult to plant and very difficult to plow in this kind of land. And when I bought this, when I bought this kind of land, I expected that it would be usable land. So it's a question of expectations as opposed to something else. Okay, so that's two ways of understanding this. The second Mishnah, and again, as we've said all along here, the basic principle is Hakol Keminhag HaMedina. If you live in a Medina, if you live in a state, a country where the assumptions are different, where it's pretty clear that you have to take along with it XYZ, then you have to take along with it XYZ. And if not, not. Again, you follow, as the Rif and the Rambam say, all these laws of the Mishnah are all, so to speak, sublimated to the principle of whatever is the standard practice in the Medina. The second Mishnah here talks about Beit Kor Afar Ani Mocher Lecha Midah B'Chevel. So when you're very specific and you say, I'm selling you a Beit Kor Afar, I'm selling you like B'Chevel, with that is judged by a rope, which means it's a very exact amount. I'm selling you this exactly, punklach, exactly as it is measured by rope. Pachat kol shehu, if you had less, meaning if you sold him less than what was agreed upon, yinakeh, then you have to take off from the price. You have to deduct the price. Hotir kol shehu, if he by accident gave too much, then you have to return that amount of land, you the buyer, because you were buying b'midah b'chevel. You both agreed that you're buying an exact amount of a beit kor. Im amar hein chaser hein yeter. But if you all both agreed and you said, if the seller said, I'm selling you a beit kor, about a beit kor, I'm not being exact, then afilu pichet rova laso hoti rova laso higio. It's okay. Yoter came, but too much yaseh cheshbon, and he has to figure out what is the amount, and they should do, if they, again, a transfer, taking off a little bit on the price or adding a little bit on the price. Mahu machzir lo ma'ot v'im ratza machzir lo karka. Okay, and again, this is all. The third Mishnah is a Mishnah which deals with the principle of what's called, which is an interesting debate in Hilchos Nedarim. What happens if you contradicted yourself internally? Midah b'chevel ani mocher lecha. What happens if I say, I'm selling you a piece of land exactly like we judge it by the amount of rope, to the last inch. But then, 2 seconds later, you said, hein chaser, hein yater. Whether it's a little, it doesn't have to be exact. So which one do we take seriously? Lashon Rishon or Lashon Achron? So the Mishnah says, Bitel hein chaser yeter mida b'chevel. You follow Lishna Achrina. You follow the last thing that the person said. If I said hein chaser hein yeter, I'm selling a little bit. I'm selling you a beit kor, about a beit kor. It could be a little more, a little less. And then I said mida b'chevel. I'm selling you an exact amount, like the judged by the rope. Bitel mida b'chevel, hein chaser v'hein yater divrei ben nanos. Okay, so that's an interesting halacha as well. And finally, in chapter 7, which again I'm not spending a lot of time on, ha'omer lechavero chatzi sadeh ani mocher lecha. If you say I'm selling you half a field, so again, what does it mean half a field? Does it mean half a field, again, simply judged exactly to the inch, or half a field in terms of quality of land? If this field has 30% really high quality land and 30%, so we split that 15%, and then we split the other 75%, 70% as well, exactly half, or not. So the Mishnah says, Mishamnim beinehem v'notel chatzi sadehu. So basically, the Mishnah seems to say that, if I'm not mistaken, the Mishnah seems to imply that you can, you kind of decide, the person who's selling can decide he wants, mostly the good land, the shamain land, and he takes half of his sadeh from that. Again, interesting halacha. Again, not going to spend too much time on that. I want to spend most of my time tonight on chapter 8 and chapter 9, which are the laws of Yerusha. For some reason, after we've already discussed in this Mesechet We've discussed the laws of shutfut and shechenut. What are the special obligations that neighbors have towards each other when they live next to each other? We then discussed the next major section of Bava Batra, which was about selling, what's included in things which are sold and what's not included in things that are sold. Okay. Um, Again, interesting. Yeah, perhaps because they would be used for silk. Yeah, could be, could be, could be. Um, so so that was the second major unit, and the third major unit is chapters 8 and 9, which are all about the laws of inheritance, of nachala. The laws of inheritance of nachala. Now, when we talk about the laws of inheritance, um, first of all, let's just make sure that we have the background. So I want to go back for a second to the second sheet before we want to go back to the second sheet on the, I'm sorry, from the chat, second sheet. And let's look at the psukim so we have in our background, so we at least have all the psukim that are in our consciousness. Okay, so the Bible, there are two major portions where we derive the laws of Yerusha, the laws of inheritance and passing on inheritance. One is the famous Benot Slavchad story, and the other is the appendix to the Benot Slavchad story, which appears later on in chapter 36 of Bamidbar. So let's just read, and just one second, let's just read the biblical material. And I want to point out something that one of the great scholars of 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 Tanakh, Jacob Milgram, Olav Hashalom, pointed out, and then we'll go back and start the mishnayot. So the Torah says, "Vatikravna benot Slavchad ben Chefer ben Gilad lemishpachat Menashe ben Yosef ela shmo benotav vatamodin lifnei Moshe v'lifnei Elazar v'lifnei etc. Leimor Avinu mate, our father died in the desert. V'hu lo haya betocha eda ki v'cheto mate uvanim lo hayu lo." Implication is that if he had sons, there would not be any issue. The biblical law seems to assume that if there are sons, Yerusha transfers immediately to the sons. It seems that at this stage of the game, it was not clear what happens if there's only daughters. That seems to be the assumption of the biblical story. The biblical law seems to be sons was a davar pashut that you have. Daughters was not so pashut at all, to say the least. Now, I do want to point out that the ancient Near East, there's a lot of mixed information from the ancient Near East. Some cultures in the ancient Near East had situations where the daughters inherited as well. Some cultures did not have the daughters, right? It wasn't uniform. This assumption that many of us make that it was kind of a uniform situation in terms of what was the law is not actually true in the ancient Near East. The text continues. They come, Lama yigara shem avinu mitoch mishpachto ki ein lo bein. Why should the name of the father, of our father, disappear because he has no son? Tenu lanu achuza b'toch achei avinu. The assumption of this question, again, is that somehow, if there was no sons, the standard practice, the default, would have been that the land may have, devolved back to, so to speak, somebody else, maybe to the government, like in America. if somebody dies without any relatives, in tate, whatever they call it, and you die, maybe the Sanhedrin takes it over. Maybe the Beit HaMikdash takes it over. Who knows who takes it over? Moshe doesn't know what to do. He comes to God, and God says, "Kain benot slavcha dovrot, naton titein lehem achuzat nachala betoch achei avihem, ve'ha'avarta et nachalat avihem lahem." It's a very strange language. It doesn't say v'natata et nachalat avihem lahem, but it says v'ha'avarta et nachalat avihem. You shall pass over the nachala, the inheritance of their father to them. And here too, ve'el bnei Yisrael tadaber le'mor, ish ki yamut v'bein ein lo, v'ha'avartem et nachlato lebito, v'im ein lo bat, unitatem et nachlato le'echav. Interesting. When it comes to the bat, when it comes to the daughter, the biblical law is v'havartem et nachlato. The language that's used is laha'avir, to pass it on. When it comes to when there's no bat and there's no ben, then it says unitatem le'achiv. V'im ein lo achim. If there is no if there is no bat and there's no bane, then you give it le'echav, to his brothers. V'im ein lo achim, unitatim et nachlato le'achei aviv. You go back a generation. V'im ein achim le'aviv, unitatem et nachlato l'sheiro ha'karov elav mimishpachto v'yarash ota. So it's very, very striking that the Bible uses two different verbs, unitatem versus v'ha'avartem. And again, it's just interesting. And what does it bespeak here? What are the Benot Slavchad really concerned about? They're clearly concerned about that Kain Benot Slav Naton Titelem Achuzat Nachala Betoch Achei Avihem, with amongst the brothers of their father. Lama Yigara Shem Avinu Mitoch Mishpachto Ki Ein Lo Bein. It sounds like somehow this family, the name of this family would die out because his ancestral nachala would not be passed on in his family from son to son to son to son to son to son. And somehow that would mean that their connection, their name, their family, somehow something would be undermined. So again, it's very, very interesting. At the end of chapter 36, the Bible adds a little appendix where the Rashi Ha'avot to the Joseph Shevet, to Ephraim, are concerned. Yes, it's true that the Benot Slavchad, they receive the portion at this point, but what's going to happen if they marry outside of the Shevet? Again, the assumption is that the husband is going to be yoresh from the wife, and certainly the children of the husband are going to inherit from the wife, and the children from the husband, if he's from a different shevet, the assumption is that he's going to come in place of the father. So what's going to happen? So basically, Moshe commands them that the daughters of Slavchad have to marry within the shevet of Ephraim, within the shevet of Yosef. Zeh hadavar shetziva Hashem l'bnot Slavchad lemor, l'tov be'eineihem tiena l'nashim, ach l'mishpachat metei avihem tiena l'nashim. V'lo tisev nachala livnei Yisrael mimateh al mateh. There's an agenda that you want to keep the nachala within the mateh. Ki ish b'nachalat mateh avutav yidbaku b'nei Yisrael. Okay? So this is basically the biblical law. The biblical law, when you read it, just without any assumptions, without any blinders, without anything, is number one, that you should, so to speak, the son should inherit. If there's no son, then it goes to the daughter. If there's no daughter, then it goes to other relatives, from the family. But it's interesting. The assumption of the thrust of it is that you want to keep it within the mishpacha. You want to keep it within the mishpacha. And the assumption, I believe, of chapter 27 is that they will, I think the assumption of 27 was in most instances, people in a shevet would marry from the same shevet. People in a tribe would marry from the same tribe. Chapter 36 is coming to say, yeah, but what happens if that doesn't happen? So here, Moshe stepped in and said, you guys have to marry inside the shevet to try to preempt that. It doesn't say that for forever and ever, there can never be marriages between the Shvatim. It just says Moshe told them, make sure that you do this. The assumption being that this is an important agenda. So once you read that, I want to read from what Jacob Milgram writes in his commentary. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to, it's not online, so I didn't get a chance to Xerox this. So he writes here on the phrase transfer, to transfer. This idea of transferring because he had no son. So it says, the verb ha'avir is used exclusively for the daughter, whereas the word natan is used for the inheriting male. The transfers from the qualified to the unqualified, or it can connote the transfer of the property from the daughter to her husband or son. The basic idea seems to be the transfer from one domain to another. The inheriting of sons, however, is not a transfer as such. This is the important point. Sons are the extension of their fathers and are technically part of the same domain. This also holds true for other persons in the chain of succession. Conceptually, what the Bible is intimating, and it makes sense from the biblical, hierarchical, patriarchal, perspective. Again, I'm not going into whether we like it, we don't like it. I'm just trying to understand it. Is that a son inherits a father, and subsequent, the brother inherits from the father. The brothers of the father inherit if there's no other relatives. They come in place of the father because they are taking the role of the father in the mishpacha. They're, so to speak, coming in place of the father. The daughter can never come in place of the father because that's just not the way that biblical society existed. The mother was not the head of the family. The mother was not the head, and therefore, since she was not the head of the family, she could not be the head of the inheritance. The inheritance and the family all go together. It's all going together. She couldn't be. The son steps in immediately in place of the father. He doesn't have to be transferred to him. The daughter, on the other hand, is a totally different situations. Again, explaining, okay, says Milgram, a man's natural heirs are his sons, but if he has no sons, his daughters become his heirs, etc., etc. If the father had no brothers, the inheritance passes on to the next of kin. Thus, the agnatic or patrilineal principle of succession through the father's male line is preserved. The daughter does not really inherit. She transfers the inheritance from the father to grandson and thereby keeps the ancestral land in the father's line. The possibility of a man's wife surviving him, and when there are no children, marrying his brother is not considered here, but it must be assumed. The whole idea of Yibum must be assumed. But again, in Yibum, the son carries the name of the father. Okay, and just taking one more quote from Milgram in his excursus on this. Milgram points out that in the ancient Near East, there were cultures that had explicit inheritance of the daughter. The Bible in its earliest stages presumes a tightly knit clan structure. The foremost goal of its legal system was the preservation of the clan. Biblical law thus rests upon a strict patrilineal principle of inheritance that prevents the transfer of land via the daughter to the clan of her husband. Okay, so the idea was to maintain it into the clan. Now, of course, then as society changes, when there's no longer a clan structure and there's no longer tied to the land, it's one of those interesting things of how do you, and basically throughout Jewish history, basically there's this constant move away from the biblical law of not really having the daughter inherit. We find all kinds of ways to get around the law, halacha l'maaseh, to have the daughter inherit. But again, that was not the biblical model. Again, etc. We're going to see, and if you look, let me show you that there's a Yerushalmi. There's actually a Yerushalmi, which, let me see if I can find it. Did I include the Yerushalmi? I thought I included the Yerushalmi. Yeah, here. This is a Yerushalmi in Bava Basra, which, listen, this Yerushalmi raises the possibility, even though it's not accepted lahalacha, on our Mishnah, which we're going to look at in a second. So, yesh nochlin umanchilin. K'tiv ish ki amut ubein ein lo, va'avartem et nachalato lebito. Should pass on the nachala to his daughter. Tani Rabbi Shmuel, Shina hakatuv, nachala zot mikol nachalot shebetorah. When it talks about passing it on to the daughter, the Bible uses a different term. Shebekulan katuv unitatem v'kan katuv v'ha'avartem. And here it says v'ha'avartem. Ibur hadinhu shetehei habat yoreshet. So Rabbi Shmuel says it is an ibur hadin. That's a terrible translation. It is an extension of the law that the Torah shall inherit. I don't think that's what it means. I just think it's not looked upon as the greatest thing. Chachmei goyim omrim, the rabbis of the Gentiles, these are Jews. Chachmei goyim omrim, bein uvat shavin ke'echat. There was an opinion in the halachic literature at one time that both boys and girls inherit as one. If there's both a boy and a girl, they both inherit. The inun darshi, they darshan, ubein ein lo, ha'im yesh lo, if he has a son, shnehem shavim. They both, okay, they both are the same. Wow. So there is an opinion that was floating around in early halacha that, again, this is a Tana, this is a Braita, that was not recorded in the Mishnah, which says, Shnehem Shavin, both boys and girls are equal. And if a boy and a girl, inherited, that they split the inheritance. That is not the Mishnaic law that was accepted and not the biblical, not the understanding of the biblical law. But again, I just wanted to show you that there was this idea floating around in some circles. Again, it's a very funny term. Chachmei hagoyim are darshaning psukim. Ostensibly, these are chachamim. Their chachmei hagoyim probably means something like they come from faraway lands. I don't know exactly what the term means, but chachmei hagoyim omrim beinu bat shavin ka'achat. Now let's go back to our Mishnah. And we have the first two mishnayot in the second parak. Parak Chet is divided into basically a couple of categories. The first Mishnah we call Nochlin Umanchilin, inheriting and pass on they're the ones inheriting and pass on their inheritance to others. The second Mishnah is called Seder Nachalot, the order of Nachala. The third one is about the status of boys and girls explicitly. What's the status of boys and girls? The fourth a Mishnah is there a way to get around the laws of Yerusha? What we call akifat, going around the laws of Yerusha. In the middle, there are mishnayot that go into seemingly a separate topic, the topic of ne'emanut, who's believed, are you my son, are you not my son? And finally, it ends with sava'a, it ends with a mishnayos that deal with, can you make a will either when you're alive or right before you die that will take effect? Can it affect the halacha? Can it not affect the halacha? And finally, just as this first section ended with Mishnayot talking about banim and banot, so too the latter part also finishes off with the laws of banim and banot and what they are allowed to receive from the estate. Even if they don't receive inheritance, what do they receive from the state in terms of halacha? Because even if you don't inherit, even if the daughters don't inherit, they have to be sustained. So they may not inherit a piece of land, but you can't just leave them. And the rabbis created all kinds of takanot to protect them, etc. So now let's go to the Mishnah. The first thing I just want to notice is that the first, and this is just, again, this is something that is very interesting from a literary point of view. The first four Mishnayos in this perek all use the language of nachala, nochalin, manchilim, nachala, an inheritance, a nachala. On the other hand, from Mishnah 5 on, the verb that's used is Yerusha. Yirash, liyorsho, Yirash, Yirshu, Yorshim. From then on, it's all about Yerusha. The last Mishnayot deal with mizonot, taking care of someone and providing for them, even if it's not actually what we would call an inheritance, but a stipend of some kind. So we're talking in the first three Mishnayos, about nachala, about the territory that you inherit. It's, in a sense, it's almost as if the first three Mishnayot, are focusing on the land and not so much on the deceased. It's much more on what is the status of the land, who does it go to? As opposed to the more you talk about Yerusha, it's much more a language that's focused on the niftar, on the person who died, and who does he give his property to, etc. Who is he giving his property to, etc., etc. Also, nachala sounds very much like we're focused on land. Nachala is often, hilo batem ad atel hamnucha vel hanachala. Nachala in the Bible often refers to your piece of land that you're entitled to. Yerusha, inheritance, can also include non-movables, movables, right? When you inherit, you can inherit a cup, you can inherit a painting, you can inherit, right? There are nechasim, there are all kinds of assets that can be inherited in addition. So again, it's just interesting to note these. Again, this is the way the rabbis organized it, and they were kind of focusing on different elements at each, so to speak, at each stage of the game. So let's take a look at the first. The first Mishnah has a whole series. I'm sure you studied it. I hope you studied. Yesh no chalim umanchilim. Yesh no chalim velo manchilim. Manchilim velo chalim. Lo no chalim velo manchilim. So basically, you have these various. There are people who inherit, as well as they inherit, so to speak. They inherit as well as they give back to the other person, right? Like the elu nochalim umanchilim ha'av et habanim ve'ha'abanim et ha'av v'achim min ha'av nochalim umanchilim. All these people, when the father dies, the son inherits. If the son dies, the father inherits the son. V'habanim et ha'av v'achim min ha'av, and the brothers from the father as well. On the other hand, ha'ish et imo veha ish et ishto ubnei achayot nochalim v'lo manchilim. Right. So a father, a man inherits the assets of his mother. A husband inherits the assets of his wife, but it doesn't go the other way. It's not reciprocal. If the man dies, the woman does not inherit, and that's why there was the creation of the ketubah to take care of her. Ha'isha et baneha, v'ha'isha et ba'ala, v'acheim manchilim v'no nochalim. When they die, their inheritance goes to the husband, etc., but they don't inherit from them. V'achim minaim lo nochalim v'lo manchilim. That's Mishnah Aleph. On the other hand, Mishnah Bet, it focuses entirely, again, on not necessarily the land. Here, this Mishnah focuses much more on Seder Nachalot, Kachu, focuses on the people. Ish ki amut, ubein ein lo, v'avartem nachalato libito, bein kodem lebat. A son goes before a daughter. V'chol yotzei yirecho shel bein kodemet lebat. Very important halacha. All the male descendants of the son come before the daughter. So if there's a daughter, if the son died but he has children, so the grandchildren of the papa bear inherit before the aunt, before the daughter. Bat kodemet la'achim. However, the daughter comes before the brothers of the father. Okay. Yotzei yirecho shel bat kodmin la'achim. But if she has children, male children, they come before the brothers of the brothers. Achim kodmin lacheav, etc., etc. Ze haklal kol hakodem benachala. If you come first in the pecking order of inheritance, your children also come in first. Okay. Now I want to look at these two mishnayot a little bit more carefully, with a couple of insights of the Talmud. So if we go back to this is this. Yeah. So okay. A couple of just insights, halacha l'ma'aseh, not halacha l'ma'aseh, but what emerges from the Gemara's discussion on some of the mishnayot. Number one, so we mentioned the discussion about Yerushat Habat, Habein Kodem Labat. If there's no Bain, the Bat does inherit. However, again, I mentioned that at some point in history there was a debate, and there was a voice in the halacha which said Bain Ubat Shavin Ka'achat, they're equivalent. Ha'im yesh lo shneim shavin. Again, this was rejected lahalacha. There is a second question. We just mentioned that the children inherit, right? We mentioned that the children inherit, Bain Kodem Levat, and we also mentioned that they inherit they also inherit from the mother. Ha'ish et imo, va'isha et ishto, u'bnei achayot. Ha'isha et baneha, va'isha et bala, v'achei ha'em. Now, in this context, the Talmud has an interesting debate. Umimakom shabata malahalan bein kodem labat. What happens when we're talking about the inheritance from the mother? So just like when bein kodem labat, when it comes to the father, afkan bein kodem labat. So too the bein inherits before the bat from the mother. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi, Amru, they disagree, and they say Mishum Rab Zechariah ben Akatzav, Echad habein, ve'echad habat, shavin b'nichsei ha'em. So this is a very interesting machloket. Echad habein, ve'echad habat. So this perspective seems to say that they should be shavin. So again, you should just be aware that there is this machloket in the Tannaitic literature. Okay, let's go back now to the next mishnayot. The mishnayot mention Benot Slavchad Natlu Shlosha Chalakim Banachala. What does that mean? So they received 3 portions. Chelek avihem shehaya im yotzei Mitzrayim. They received the portion of Slavchad, who left Egypt, even if he died, he didn't make it to Eretz Yisrael. He was apportioned a piece of land from the time that he left Egypt. We don't apportion the land simply based on who enters Eretz Yisrael. We apportion the land. V'chelko im echav b'nichsei chefer. Also, they got the portion that he had inherited because of his father, who also left Egypt and died. So he had that portion that he had inherited from his father, even though they never made it to Eretz Yisrael. They got that portion. V'shahaya bechor notel shnei chalakim. And they also got a double because he was the bechor of Chefer, of his father. Wow. So this is a very, very striking statement. And it's based upon a very important principle in halacha. This is the principle that is articulated in the Brisa. It's a machloket. Titania, Rab Yeshaya Omer, liyotzei Mitzrayim nitchalka haaretz, shenemar l'shmot matot avotam minchalu. Rabbi Yonatan Omer, leba'ei haaretz nitchalka haaretz. The people who left Egypt, we did not, so to speak, divvy up a piece of land to them, even if they weren't able to get to the land, and then their children inherit that land. No, only the people who entered into the land, they themselves, they are the ones who got a piece of land, and they got a piece of land. Now, this debate, some people have explained, this debate, which is, the Mishnah certainly takes the side of Yotzei Mitzrayim, Nitchalka Haaretz. This debate may reflect an interesting, so to speak, debate about how to understand the punishment of the Dor Yotzei Mitzrayim, of the generation that left Egypt. When God said, you're not going to enter the land of Israel, doesn't mean that they were not going to enter the land of Israel is a technical statement. They really had a right to enter the land of Israel. And they really had a right to claim ownership of a portion of the land of Israel. They were part of the Jewish people. They left Egypt. They were entitled to get a portion of the land of Israel. It's just technically because of their sin, they died in the desert, but that piece of land was really theirs, and therefore their descendants inherit that land that, so to speak, they were supposed to get. In addition, okay, that's one way to understand it. On the other hand, do you say that when they were punished and cut off from entering into the land of Israel, they were cut off entirely from this entire whole, viewpoint, this entire whole access to the land of Israel, and their portion in the land of Israel was cut off, and it's totally only judged by who actually entered into the land of Israel, and it, so to speak, started from there, how you apportion the land of Israel. Again, an interesting dispute. Let's go back to the next Mishnah. Mishnah says, Echad habein, the echad habat b'nachala, both a son and a daughter get the nachla, as has been explained before. If there's no bain, then the bat gets it. But again, conceptually, she's simply there to be a kind of holding company until she has children and the grandchildren can step in and continue the line of the father. Ella, and this is a proof of that. Shehabein notel pishnayim b'nichsei aviv. The bain is a bechor, can get double. Ve'eno notel pishnayim b'nichsei ha'em. He does not, however, get pishnayim b'nichsei ha'em. V'habanot nizonot minichsei ha'av. And the banot, the daughters, are provided for from the estate of the father. Ve'eno nizonot minichsei ha'em. The Ketubah provides that the daughters will be taken care of, whatever happens. Okay. The next Mishnah raises a very interesting thing. And that is, given the fact that Yerusha and inheritance is on some level is very much tied to monetary transactions, how much freedom do we have to play with the Jewish law? So the Mishnah has a fascinating case. Ha'omer ish ploni b'ni b'chor, lo yitel pishnaim. If a man says, this, my son who is firstborn, I don't like him. I don't want him to take a double portion. The Torah says that a b'chor gets, ish ploni b'ni, lo yiresh im echav. I don't want my son to inherit with the other brothers. I don't like this son. Lo amar klum. He cannot do that. If he wants to work within the rules of Yerusha, of inheritance, shehisne al mashakasav batorah, because he has tried to make a t'nai, a condition against what the Torah says. The Torah says you do this, and you're trying to undermine what the Torah says. However, if during your lifetime, it's not Yerusha, but 5 years before you die, you decide already, in my lifetime, I can give what my inherit, I can give my property, whoever I want. If you want to divide your property during your lifetime, you want to divest yourself of your holdings. Riba le'echad u'mi'et le'echad. You want to give more to one and another and less to another. V'hishve lahem et ha'bechor. And everyone he gave the same, including the firstborn. Devarav kayamim. It works because he's not trying to go and use the Torah's model of Yerusha and trying to go around it. He's simply selling in his lifetime or giving in his lifetime whoever he wants. V'im amar mishum Yerusha. But if he says, I'm doing this as part of the laws of Yerusha, lo amar klum. Okay? And the same thing, katav bein b'tchila, bein ba'emtza, bein b'sof. If somewhere in the shtar, in the document, he wrote, mishum matana, I'm giving this as a present, devarav kayamim. So, devarav kayamim. Ha'omer, and again, the same principle. Ha'omer ish ploni yirashani. If you say, I want someone else, I want my neighbor to inherit me, even though there's a daughter. When I die, I want someone to inherit me. BT, or I want my daughter to inherit me, even though there's a boy. I have a son. Lo amar klum, again, you are trying to get around the laws of the Torah. Shehistam mashkas b'Torah. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Amar, he has an interesting little twist. Im Amar al mishu roi liyorsho. However, if he did say this in relationship to someone who's in the parsha of Yerusha, Dvarav Kayamim, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says, if you want to give it to the girl instead of to the boy, it works. Wow. But if you want to say it to someone who cannot be Yorishu, you want to give it to your friend instead of to your daughter, that doesn't work. And finally, if during your lifetime you wrote, I want to give away all of my assets now to my best friend, and you left nothing for your children, Masha asa asu, what he did is do. Aval ein ruach chachamim nocha himenu. But the rabbis are not happy with him. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, im lo hayu banav noagim kishura, if his children were not behaving properly, then he would be praised, zachur latov. I want to look a little bit in depth. There's an interesting article that analyzed by Rabbi Baruch Weintraub, who's a big Talmud Chacham in Israel, in the Gush, one of the younger Rabbanim there. So he explains this machloket that we saw here about Masnal Mashakasav Batorah. So the Mishnah had said this machloket, this idea, and obviously our Mishnah holds that you cannot be matna, you cannot condition and try to create a law that tries to go around the Torah. Circumvent. Thank you. Hagemara meviyah machloket tanaim bedin masna mashkos b'Torah. Ledat Rabbi Meir, ein tnai kazeh chal olam. That's our Mishnah. V'ilu ledat Rabbi Yehuda tnai chal b'dvarim shebemamon. Rabbi Yehuda says that when it comes to monetary things, it generally does apply. Ulam Gemara mechadeshet. The Gemara, however, points out and mechadeshet, it creates a new understanding.
You're not sharing the text. Do you want to?
Ki hakol modim bedin mishnatenu. Everyone agrees she'ein ha'av yachol lishlol me'echad bano et chelko b'Yerusha mipnei she'haben eino mochel al hefsedo. It's a very interesting Gemara. The Gemara says that even Rabbi Yehuda, who in general says that you can create a condition in areas of halacha that touch on dinei mamanis, here you can't do it because the son never is mochel. He never gives up on what is duly his. At first blush, this is very strange, he says. Rabbi Yehuda eino omer ki amafsid yachol limchol al hefsedo. Okay? That's not how Rabbi Yehuda explains that in general the principle works. Ella sha'mas l'mashkos b'Torah t'na'u kayim. Mashma sha'tnai hu shemo v'lo ha'mechila. Has nothing to do with mechila, with forgiving or giving up on something that's owed to you. So what is the Gemara's meaning when it says that it connects it to mechila? However, he says, if we understand the phrase, hachalo kamachil, the son is not ready to give up on his rightful thing. Einam haracha uvdatit. If you understand that it is not trying to explain objectively what is happening on the ground, what the son is thinking. Ki'im kviyah hilchatit. It's a statement of halachic state. It's a halachic statement, an objective halachic. She'einu yachol limchol. When it comes to Yerusha, it's not that, we say, children don't want to give up on their inheritance, and therefore you can't be masna mashkas b'Torah. He simply doesn't have the ability to be mochel. What does that mean? That means that what you have here is as follows. In general, hamatnal mashkas b'Torah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that if you make a condition about something written in the Torah, b'davar shebemamon, in something related to monetary matters, t'na'u kaim, generally it works. Mevusas al anacha is based upon the principle shebedinei mamnus divrei Torah he me'ein breirat machdal. It's the default position. In general, when it comes to dinei mamnus, when it comes to civil law, the Torah's statements about what should be are basically in the absence of any other custom or convention. Klomar heim noagim kolot lo huchlat acheret. That's what's based That's what it explains the whole principle of that you follow the minhag hamedina when it comes to monetary matters. Ha'efsharut limchol asura liot even bochan l'she'ila. So the question of whether you can be mochel when it comes to Yerusha is asuya liot even bochan. It is the litmus test whether a certain halacha is a breirat mechdal, it's the default position, or halacha shatorah roba erech atzmi, or it's an absolute, independent, autonomous concept and value. Lidugma, for example, love eino yachol limchol milve v'latet lo ribit. Somebody who borrowed $100 is not allowed to be mochel to the malve, to the lender and say, "Oh, I'm going to give you $10 extra as ribis." Vasibra brura haTorah lo rak poteret et halov eminitin. The Torah didn't just say you don't have to give ribis. Ela oseret. It forbids the giving of interest, and it looks down on the phenomena. Imkain halacha sheyevshol imchol Yerusha melamedet. What the halacha says that you're not able to do mechila, what it teaches you is Yerusha ain't a zchut mamonit ba'alma. It's not simply a monetary right to receive the inheritance. Ki'im halacha hamikayemet erech. It's a halacha which is trying to fulfill a value. I would say the value is the idea that a son steps in to the role of the father, etc., etc., and ensures the stability of the clan. Va'alkein ein hi kishar dvarim shebemamon. Sheladat Rabbi Yehuda tnai tofes bahem. Elahu domel isurim. It's like an isur sheyev shalat no alehem. And that's why the Rambam again makes it very clear. Ein adam yachol lahorish lemi she'eno rarui liyosho. You cannot pass on the Yerusha to someone who halachically is not ra'ui, is not appropriate according to halacha to receive it. V'lo la'akor ha'Yerusha min ha'yorish. You can't undo it and uproot Yerusha from the person who's entitled. Afa pishes and mamon, even if it's mamon. Lefi shenemar beparshat nachalat v'haita livneisa lechukat mishpat. Lomar shechukazo lo nishtaneh ve'ein hatnai mo'il ba. Okay. In Yirtzeh Hashem, next week, we will finish chapter 8. We will also finish chapter 9 and hopefully touch on parts of chapter 10. Where are they up to in the Mishnah Yomit?
8.
They're in the middle of 8? Okay, good. So it'll be perfect. We'll finish up chapter 8. We'll do chapter 9, and then we'll move ahead. Okay, everybody, thank you for participating this evening, and I will see you next week for our last class.
Thank you, everyone, for coming one more time.
You.
I would like to highlight some upcoming classes. While we are finishing up Bava Batra, coming up next is Sanhedrin, where Rabbi Nathaniel will be teaching that. You can sign up for the next class in the Mishnah in Depth series at Drisha.org/classes. And with that,
Thank you.
take care.